All right, good morning everybody. So today we are solving quadratics. We're going to use something called the quadratic formula. I just want to remind you, we've been solving quadratics for quite some time. And listen, when you solve a quadratic, you got this parabola and you are looking for the x-intercepts. What are they called? They're called solutions, they're called zeros, they're called roots, they're called x-intercepts. We have several different ways to solve these. Let me show you a couple of them. Okay, so we've been solving quadratics for a long time. I bet you didn't think there'd be so much to it, but there is. Listen, we've solved them by factoring, we've solved them by graphing, we've solved them by completing the square, by taking square roots, and now by quadratic formula. You might be wondering, why are there so many ways to solve quadratics? Well, it's because they don't always work all the time, not all of them. Factoring works really well, and it's quick when you can factor it, but it can't always be factoring. Graphing works pretty well, but sometimes you have to estimate the x-intercepts. Like if the x-intercept's 1.36, it's hard to estimate that unless you're really graphing really carefully or using Desmos. Completing the square, we just did that. Taking square roots, that only works when you don't have a bx term, but I'll talk about that in a second. Now today, the quadratic formula. This quadratic formula works all the time with everything and finds imaginary answers, everything. This is like the end-all be-all. This is the best thing we can do with quadratics. But these, a lot of times, are just shortcuts and make things faster. You'll see the quadratic formula is not hard, but it's a little bit lengthy. Let me show you what's up. So in order to use the quadratic formula, we have to put it in standard form first. And remember, standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Look, the a, the b, the c, that's really important. Take a look. Here is the quadratic formula. Ta-da! Look at all that. I got b there, a negative b, I got b squared, an a, a c, and an a. And there's that plus and minus sign. Some of this should look pretty familiar. Pause your video real quick and write all this stuff down. This is what we're going to use to solve things today. All right, so our first example, here it is. Solve x squared plus 4x equals 1. The very first thing you have to do with all of these is make it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 1 and subtract 1. I get x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0, like that. Has to equal 0 because, well, that's why they're called zeros, right? Remember, this could be the same as y, and we're wondering, when will y equal 0? So if you think about this for just a second, you could maybe use factoring. Unfortunately, this one is not factorable, so that won't work. You could complete the square. It's kind of lengthy. You can't take a square root because of this little guy right here. Since you have this, oh my, that doesn't work. Since you have that 4x, you can't take the square root. That's kind of a problem. So we're kind of left with completing the square, no, not completing the square, the quadratic formula. So let's identify this. I'm going to write the standard form right underneath it, ax squared plus bx plus c, like that. And what does that give me? That gives me a, which is 1 right there. Make that better. Still not very good. There it is, 1. So a equals 1, b equals 4. Got that, and c equals -1. I need to take these values here and I need to input them into the formula. What's the formula? X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, everything over 2a. I'm going to take these numbers and plug them into this formula. Then I'm going to show you how to solve it. All right, here we are. Let me remind you, the a was 1, the b was 4, the c is -1. It's a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, everything over 2 times a. Now you might be wondering to yourself, what would you do first? We're going to take care of this square root first. Believe it or not, the square root is a type of exponent. So we're still following PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So we're going to do that first, but I have to keep track of everything I'm doing. You really need to stay nice and neat. So it's going to be -4 plus or minus. I'm going to leave it in the square root. 4 squared is 16. What's this? -4 times 1 times -1. That's a positive 4. I guess I can go ahead and multiply that right now. 2 times 1 is 2. We're getting there. Now let's simplify what's underneath the radical. This is -4 plus or minus the square root of 20, everything over 2. And you know what? This is not a bad answer. It's not bad. It is an answer actually, but it's not a simplified answer. Let me show you what I'm going to do to simplify that. Of course, the square root of 20, I'm pretty sure you guys all know what the square root of 20 is, right? X equals -4 plus or minus. I'd have to write that in simplest radical form. Wouldn't that be 2 radical 5 over 2, like that? And now this presents kind of an issue. Can we simplify this? Can I simplify this 2, that 2, and the 4? And the answer is yes, only because I can simplify all 3 of these. Allow me to remind you that what we do when we simplify a fraction is we divide by 2. We've done this before. Right before we left, we did this, so you can divide that by 2 as well. Both of them, I can divide that and that. Remember, you cannot divide a radical by a whole number like this, but if I were to divide all of them, then I'd get this. X equals -4 divided by 2 is -2 plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. I can't divide the 5, so there's that. I'll keep the 1 there just so you see it. 2 divided by 2 there is 1. So if I cleaned up this answer, it would look like this. -2 plus or minus the square root of 5. And remember, that does represent 2 answers. -2 plus the square root of 5 and -2 minus the square root of 5. All right, just another comment about this answer. Remember, there are 2 answers, and they are the x-intercepts. But if you tell people, oh, that parabola crosses the x-axis at -2 plus or minus radical 5, it doesn't mean much. So I suppose what we could do is take the square root of 5, which is about 2.24 is what I'll say, like this. And I can get those x-intercepts a little bit more accurate like this. It'd be -2 plus 2.24, and then x equals -2 minus 2.24, like this. And then my answers are going to be, what is this? This is 0.24, and this is -4.24. So here, these 2 points are where the parabola crosses the x-axis. Any questions? Questions? I can't hear you. What? All right, I want to show you another example where we're going to find some imaginary answers. Let me remind you, the very first thing you have to do is make it equal to 0. So I need to move this 6x over here in the 3. Now I'd like to keep the a. I'd like to keep it positive, but you don't have to in this case. It's easier when you're factoring, but in the quadratic formula, it really doesn't matter what's positive and negative, but I do have it equal to 0. So, okay, I have, this is my A, this is my B, this is my C. I'm going to plug it into my formula now. X equals -b, that's a -6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 6 squared, minus 4 times A, which is 5, and then times C, which is 3, everything over 2 times 5, like so. All right, so I need to simplify underneath the square root first, because again, it is a type of exponent. So I have x equals -6 plus or minus the square root of 36. And 4 times 5 is 20 times 3 is 60. It's a -60 everything over 10, like that. Okay, this is going to give us an imaginary answer because 36 minus 60 is a negative number. Let me just change boards real quick and copy that down and simplify it a little bit. Now I have x equals -6 plus or minus the square root of -24, everything over 10. And again, that comes from this one right here, that 36 minus 60 is -24. That's how I get that. And how do I simplify a -24, the square root of that? You know, we got to take the I out and we got to put it in simplest radical form. So it's going to be x equals -6 plus or minus 2i radical 6, everything over 10. This right here is the 2i radical 6. You should have that down pretty well. And again, I have the same question now. Can I simplify this one, or is this the end answer? Well, again, you can simplify it if you can simplify in all 3 places. Is there a GCF of all 3 of these? There is. It's a 2, and if you divide everything by 2, then we should be able to work it out. So since everything can be divided by 2, I'm going to divide everything by 2 and get my simplified answer. -6 divided by 2 is -3. Leave that plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 is 1. The I is still there. I radical 6 over 10 divided by 2 is 5. All right, good. There's an answer that's imaginary. I would leave it like that. You could separate it, but with imaginary answers, that's good enough. Now, if I made any mistakes, I'm sure that Eric's going to let me know. Eric, take a look. Text me if I made a mistake. You guys be cool out there, all right? Take a look at that worksheet. I'll talk soon.